The World Economic Forum focuses on the global economy, and the mental health is no longer just a medical issue. It's a global and economic one. Mental health issues, particularly depression and anxiety, cost the global economy at least $1 trillion in productivity. Ms. NEERJA Birla's work supports the idea of a brain economy, where cognitive skills, emotional resilience, and mental well-being are viewed as vital capital for the economy. Introducing her through the lens of this frames mental health as an investment in human capital, not just social service. Her work is not just as an advocate. She's a builder of infrastructure. Her initiative, Empower, was launched to bridge the massive gap in mental health care in India. In many developing economies like India, the stigma surrounding mental health prevents treatment. Her work represents the cultural shift required to make mental health care accessible. Empower focuses heavily on youth and adolescents, since 50% of mental health conditions start by the age of 14, and her work is essential for securing the future workforce at the WEF for this economy. And to solve the economic challenges of the next decade, we must first secure the cognitive resilience of our people. Our next speaker has been a pioneer in breaking the silence around mental health in one of the world's largest economies. And by founding Empower, she has not only provided care to thousands, but ignited a cultural shift. Please welcome a champion of the global brain economy as we celebrate an evening of resilience. Please give a big round of applause for Ms. NEERJA Birla. My name is Ayati Dashkar. Thank you, everybody.
Good evening, everyone. My name is KATARZYNA GAWEł, and I'm head of Diversity, Equity and Inclusion and Nirja Springer Polska. I'm also Forbes Women podcaster, but today I have a great pleasure to talk with Mrs. NEERJA Birla. NEERJA, please tell me, do you remember the first moment when you realized that mental health, inclusive education, and women's health is your mission? Is your mission, and you decided to start the foundation?
It's uncanny you ask me this question, because it's actually 10 years to almost the date, which was 17th January, 10 years back. In a sense, it was a moment of epiphany, but it was also something that led to it. So, my own lived experience, also my daughter had her own tryst with mental health, and it was an extremely difficult period. And during that, I thought to myself that, if this is the kind of trouble that a family needs to go through, whether it was stigma, inability to seek help, inability to speak about it, having to suffer in silence because the judgment was just so much. And that's when I decided that, I must get into this space of mental health and try and alleviate the stigma around it and create awareness. And it was literally, though, like I'm saying, it was something which was in my mind and something that I wanted to do. But it was just one night when I said, okay, I must just do this now. And literally the next morning, I called up a couple of people and I said, okay, this is it. We need to do this. I just took a paper pencil. I wrote down about 10 things that I wanted to do, and we just started off. So it was very organic, completely uncharted. I didn't know what I was getting into at all at that point. Didn't realize how difficult it's going to be, how much of an uphill task it's going to be. But I just wanted to kind of, help other people not go through the trouble that I went through, and also alleviate the stigma around it. I also felt that, having a mental health concern back then was even more stigmatized, to the extent that people were not even willing to acknowledge you're going through it, and other people looked at you with shame. And I wanted to, bring dignity to it. I want to, get across the point that even people with mental health concerns don't need to be discriminated. They're also productive parts of the society. And even for yourself, even for the person going through it, it's important to get that message across that you are important, and you can definitely be a productive asset. And just because you are mentally ill or you have a mental illness doesn't mean that you're any less. So the idea was to just normalize a conversation around it, and kind of make you feel that just having a mental illness doesn't make you abnormal, and that's not what defines you. That's not what can limit you. So, that's what the
personal story.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing it. And your initiatives reach almost 180 billion people. So how do you scale it? Because the initiative, or maybe we will start, what kind of initiatives you lead? Maybe we'll explain briefly to our audience what kind of initiatives you lead.
So right from creating awareness, which is the first starting point, because I realized that till you don't make people realize the need, and very often, people, a lot of times actually, even now, and back then it was even more, one didn't even realize you're going through a mental health concern. So let alone then acknowledging it. So the first point was, how do you create awareness about it? So we did a lot of awareness campaigns, we did a lot of events around it, tried to get people together. And then after that came the next thing, was about providing clinical care, which was counseling and psychiatric. I remember there were times when I used to get calls and people used to ask me that, do I need to see a psychologist or do I need to see a psychiatrist? What is the difference between the two? People didn't even know that. So then came the whole bit about, providing accessible healthcare. How do you make it accessible? And what is the care that you need to provide? So the clinical care, the psychiatric and the counseling. Also, the other thing that we do is create awareness and educate people about it. So just the basic mental health literacy. Awareness is one side, but after creating the awareness, you have to educate people about what really is mental health. How do you become the first point of contact? How do you deal with people? Just like mental health first aiders. So we started doing that. And then we also we have a helpline, which is 24/7 and running in about 7 languages. And also working with different communities. So we work with, of course, youth and adolescents, which is the focus. We work a lot with women. And we work in different communities. We work a lot with the government, with a lot of public and private partnerships. And when I say communities, we're working with a lot of security forces. We're working with the police. So many different. We're working with shelter homes. Pretty much across the gamut.
So the scale is huge. And what have you learned about scaling mental health across, as you said, cultures, ages, generations? I'm interested in scale. How do you do this, and what have you learned from it?
So I think, one of the biggest lessons, couple of lessons that I think we live and we learn. So one has been that, mental health in itself is universal, right? So whether it's anxiety, whether it's depression, it's universal. All of us, we're all on a spectrum, we go through it. But the care is very, very customized. So it's the care that you provide, the context of it has to be very personal and very bespoke, because so to give you an example, if somebody going through anxiety or even a more serious mental health concern in a shelter home, a child age 5 going through anxiety in a shelter home would be very different from a child in an urban school going through anxiety at age 5. So the anxiety would be the same, the age would be the same, but the context in which it is set, and therefore the care that is needed to be provided will have to be different. So everybody, the care needs to be very bespoke. It's very contextual to geography, the culture, language. Language is a huge barrier in India. So language plays a very important part. For example, in Hindi, in our national language, there is no word for anxiety. So sometimes people cannot even explain anxiety with the word anxiety. A lot of times people are actually explaining the symptoms to explain what they're going through. So language is a huge barrier, and that is something that we need to cross. The other big learning has been that, yes, care has to be reactive. So Counseling is, of course, very important. So, for example, crisis helplines are very important. So care has to be reactive, but in order to scale up, it needs to be institutionalized. So you have to embed it in the ecosystem of the people. So whether it is mental health counseling, whether it is preventive, whether it is just promotive, it has to be in the system. It has to be something that is available 24/7, and it has to be very local to them. Until you don't systematize the care, you're not going to be able to scale up, because then it just remains one-off. So, for example, screening. If you have to make it systematized. You have to institutionalize it. Then you can talk about preventive mental health, and you can then talk about promotive mental health.
Fantastic. We have here Annabella Basler, who started the Equal Voice Initiative, which is about equal voice of men and women in media. And she always said that you can't change what you don't measure. So what about measurements? Do you measure the return of investment of mental health?
So that's a good question, because I think we're very often asked that, right? How do you measure it? So to me, yes, of course we measure it. We have to measure it, because otherwise you don't get the funding for it. But that in itself, to me, is such a lacuna, because your return on investment is so difficult to really measure in terms of really quantitative. So yes, I can say, like the stats that you just mentioned, that so many X number of people are suffering. I can say that, for example, for every $1 that I invest in mental health care, I'm going to get an investment of $4 in return for productive use of that amount of time. So I can measure all of that. But to me, really, the measurement is in the stability. There's a lot of things that are intangible, and that's how you need to look at it, right? So, for example, in the work that we do with a security force called CISF in India, but when we started working with them, through all our work of screening, mental health counseling, creating awareness, creating mental health first aiders within the system, so people could go to them, and creating that safe space. Of course, we were able to reduce the suicide rate by 40%. So now that's measurable. That's huge. But to me, what is even more which really captures investment even greater, is to know that attrition rate has dropped down, social functioning has increased, loneliness has decreased. So that to me is a greater measure, because that means that you're able to really improve the quality of life, you're able to improve you're able to improve the well-being of the person, you're able to improve the social functioning. So yes, we definitely measure it. We do measure we take the evidence, we measure it, we have assessments, we are monitoring the impact of it, all of that. But I think what we really need to do differently is to measure it, to look at it differently. We need to have a more qualitative lens to look at the long-term impact. Very often, you're looking at impact, you're looking at very outcome-based impact, and therefore the funding is very short-term. But what we need to look at more systemic infrastructure building impact. Are we being able to change that? And I think that is something that takes time, because it takes decades to really bring about that change, and we need to view it in that lens.
And regarding still gender inequality, do you see gender inequality also in mental health? So do you focus more on men or women? Do you see the difference?
So, let me share a very interesting stat with you. And this is something that has fascinated me as well. Initially, it really fascinated me, and now I know that that's the trend. So when we started the helpline just pre-COVID, it was a joint venture with the state government. And it was really reactive, because we were realizing that a lot of cases were coming up. So we set up this 24/7 line. And then when we started collecting data on it, we realized that about 78% of callers were men. I thought that probably it's just back then, but even now it still continues to be so. The strange part is that on the helpline, we have about 70 to 80% callers being men, whereas in our day-to-day work, which is offline, there are more women who are using our services. So which tells me that I think mental health doesn't discriminate gender, whether it's men or women. I think it sort of happens to both. But yes, there is stats that says that women are twice as likely to suffer from anxiety and depression. But that just is women per se also. Of course, it's a lot of emotional turmoil and stuff like that, which, one can go on and on about. But men also suffer equally. And I think the sad part is that men are not willing to talk about it very openly, which is why on the helpline we see many more callers which are males, because I think they prefer the incognito route and they're able to then talk about it. But we don't discriminate between men and women while we're offering services. I think, it's only fair to offer it to both. But yes, I think intrinsically our work, just because we also work with shelter homes, so our work is a lot more with women. You have a lot more women coming up and seeking help. So therefore it sort of tends towards women.
So it's about different approach, not
It's a different approach,
discrimination.
totally different approach.
Exactly. And for many women here, you are a female role model, and it's also, gender equality to show such female role models in public space, in the media. So when young women and girls look at you as a leader, as a philanthropist, as a change maker, what do you most hope they understand about power, success, and responsibility you have right now?
I think power and responsibility power comes with responsibility. And I think you need to be able to give back to society in equal measure, because the power has been bestowed on you for a particular reason. And I think making good use of it to bring about good change, to bring about impact, positive impact, and change lives positively is something that needs to be looked at.
And what should our global Davos audience take from your experience? If we imagine, and you are just mental health legacy, you are right now legacy. So what would you pass to them? What can they do different tomorrow, starting from tomorrow?
So that's a great question, because I was thinking about the same. I think we all need to understand that, traditionally mental health has been on the sidelines. I think it needs to take center stage. I think even as a fiscal priority, it needs to be at the core. It needs to be centralized. What we don't realize is that mental health is an infrastructure. It's what keeps us going. It's a fragile force that keeps everything together. And everybody talks about it, but I don't think that enough is done. I think it's very underfunded, it's under-researched, and it's underutilized. So I think if we can change the lens to that and get it into sharper focus, everybody talks about, what are the different things that are affecting people, but what we don't understand is that it's the mental health and the well-being that is at the social fabric of the society. Until we don't address that, how are we going to get more productive? So while we're talking about productivity and we're trying to do all these things, but if our mental health is not in the right place, if the well-being is not there, I don't think we can sort of gain steps. I don't think that we can separate out people from the systems that they're working in.
And would you do something differently if you start right now?
In mental health?
Yes.
I think I would focus a lot on institutionalizing it, on systematizing it, on trying to get more people on board, on how do we embed it in the workplace. So for example, in the workplace, how do we embed it in the system? How do we bring about a more cultural shift and a mindset shift so that you sort of view it differently and you work on it differently?
Thank you very much. It was fascinating, and really congratulations for all your great achievements. And please stay with me right now, because I would like to ask Rupa on stage.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
To honor you for your great achievements. Rupa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mrs. Nirja, for sharing your time with us with this busy schedule. I would like to invite the First Lady to join us. But before I give this award, I want to say a few words. These are very personal words. Being a mental health advocate means so much to women in this room, specifically to me. I was just talking to a few people backstage that how much it's so personal to everybody. I was suffering from mental health when I first gave birth to my kid. And I realized when she was 2 months old that I'm not in a good shape. I dropped her back in India with my parents in Orissa and lived without her for 9 years to figure my mental health. And it's just 4 years since when my daughter is living with me, and she's right here. Even though we are talking about building sustainable economies, stronger societies, but I think having a stronger mental health network, support, and embracing who we are, having that support means so much. Thank you so much for doing all the great work you do. And I hand over this award to the First Lady to present you.
Well, last year I had this privilege and honor to be awarded this fantastic award, and now this is my privilege and my great honor to give this award.
Thank you so
From
much.
the bottom of my heart, and I think not only from mine, for all of us.
So
All of us. All the best. Take care. And do the fantastic work.
Thank you so much. That
God bless
really
you.
means
All
a
the
lot.
best. Yeah, you're fantastic. Such a leader.
Thank you.